Welcome back to the Weight of Coaching podcast, the show where we dig into systems, strategies, and the science behind high performance coaching and strength and conditioning. I'm your host, Jordan Browne, head coach at Method Barbell. Each episode, we will talk with coaches, researchers, and practitioners who are building better athletes through clear methods and smart programming. Today's guest is Kyle, an international coach who's reshaping the next generation of weightlifters. In this episode, we'll deep dive into how Kyle has built a strong training culture for his group, earned athlete buy in as a young performance coach, and developed scalable systems that serve both in person and remote athletes. So, Kyle, how are you doing today?
Really good. Really good. Stoked to be on here. It'll be fun.
Hey, that's what I'm saying. So, tell me a little bit about how we got here, how you got to be who you are.
Yeah, so uh, my first introduction to the lifts was probably like most people at this point was through CrossFit. Um, Started doing that like end of high school into college. Went to uh, university and in that had everybody, parents, friends telling me that the best way to get integrated in school and build a resume was to start or be a part of really some sort of like university club or student body. I wasn't somebody who loved school. I did it because it was something that needed to be done. And I kind of came up with the concept of like, I don't want to join a club, I'm going to start a club. And weightlifting was going to be the thing that I was going to start at the school. Little did I know at the time, at 18 years old, that universities at that time weren't super into the idea of having a weightlifting club. They didn't even know what it was. So it took like 2 years to start, but halfway through school, got that started. And that was like my introduction into coaching side in weightlifting. Up until that point, and then after that, I was an athlete. Never did anything that was super fun or impressive to write home about. But got that exposure, trained as an athlete, started that club, and um, from there graduated school. And me and another guy who was the president of a club at another university, high school best friends, lived together, kind of said like, hey, we have this base of kids and we want a club to compete under. And that's how 1440 started. And from where it went then to where it is today, looking back, I wish I could tell you like this is exactly how it happened, but um, it's been a long 8 years since then or something like that. Um, but yeah, that was the introduction, kind of through school and through CrossFit.
Sweet. Were you always somebody that wanted to start things, build things up?
Um, I think that's kind of my personality type. I never really loved the concept of like I guess the 9 to 5, um, where I came from like a household that was in business. My dad was in the restaurant business. I originally went to school to be in hospitality, and the concept then was like management or having my own thing. So I think that piece always existed a little bit, but I can say like never got into weightlifting with the idea of like I'm going to do this for a living and build a business off of weightlifting. So
Yeah.
yes and no.
You switched the 9 to 5 for a 24/7
Yeah,
kind
pretty
of
much.
life.
Yeah, people. Yeah, pretty much. I switched the regimented like safe thing for like let's just be as risky as possible and try to make a living from weightlifting.
Sounds like fun. That's
Yeah,
that's what I like to do too.
yeah, it is a blast. Like I wouldn't trade it for anything.
And how did the name 1440 come up?
It's a good question. Um, so at the time when me and Dave were young and eager, and I say young, I'm 30, but younger. Um, we were just like the type of kids that like were ultra obsessed with hard work, and especially Dave. And in college, on his wall, he had 1440 on his wall. And he was the type that like we would work out at 5 a.m. and 5 p.m. and we had nothing in between. Like it was summer as a college student, but like that's just what you did, and you woke up before everybody else woke up and you worked harder than everybody else, and like that's where success came from. The mantra and concept with 1440 was it was just capitalizing on each individual day and letting those compound. So when we came out of school and wanted to start something, that was just like the obvious piece. We had a belief in that mantra, and that's how we kind of lived up until that point, one day at a time, and stacked those. And it was kind of an easy decision for us to name that. And over the years, that ideology, if you will, has like morphed and changed into like its own little thing. But it really started on Dave's wall in college.
I'm glad it was a 1440 picture.
Yeah.
Because who knows what those college pictures could be?
Yeah, I know. For him, it was drastically different than most.
That's what I'm saying.
Yep.
With like that kind of hard work and effort, is that one of the core kind of values or culture at 1440?
Yeah, I think probably the biggest piece of that resonates with the name is like the one day at a time concept. Weightlifting is really hard. And it doesn't matter if you are somebody who is walking into a gym to learn for the first day, it's hard. Or you're somebody who's training for the Olympics, it's hard, and everything in between. The goals that you have are irrelevant to the difficulty. And for us, I think it's important to recognize that in any of those goals, they're all long term in a sense. Like there's nothing in weightlifting that's short term. And really the reasoning behind that is like I've never found a weightlifter who is 100% completely satisfied with where they're at. Everybody wants to get better. And the nature of weightlifting is you always can. So in order to like rationalize that and find ways to divide up progress and what that long term looks like, is just taking it one day at a time. You're going to have good days, you're going to have bad days. It's just coming in and being intentional with the effort on that day and letting those stack together.
I gotcha. So when we're pushing each day at a time, what do you want your athletes to kind of feel like the culture is, or what do you want them to feel when they're training with you?
One of the biggest things that I always say is there's two things that you can control, and it's your attitude and your effort. I would imagine that almost every coach has said something along those lines. And the number one priority on any given day is controlling those two things and then enjoying it and being happy when you're doing it. So like the continual message is one, that you get to choose to do this. We're in a pay to play sport, right? There's very few of us who are being paid to weightlift. It'd be awesome if everybody was. We're paying to do this. Let's make sure we enjoy it. And then let's control the two things that usually garner happiness in the sport. And that's just controlling the attitude and effort that you put in each day that you walk in. If you do that, you do it for a really long time, you're probably going to do pretty well.
Yeah, it's really easy to get caught up and be like, oh, I should be better. I should have all of these things, and start floating those ideas around instead of being like, I'm choosing to do this. I want these hard things to test me to get better, to keep chipping away at this.
Yeah, 100%.
How do you kind of navigate those conversations with your athletes when they start to get into those mindsets?
Yeah, I think understanding the person that's in front of you is super important. I think that everybody responds to coaching and feedback in a different way. There's certainly like buckets that you can put people into of personality types, but the way that you say things and how you say them is going to impact everyone a little differently. So I think it's understanding that piece. Like, if I'm talking to somebody who has been weightlifting for 6 months and they have a full-time job and maybe they have a child at home, what those conversations look like and the expectations that you lay out look different than somebody who is competing at an international level. Now, with that being said, the expectations that we have for everybody are the same. And that's whatever the goals that you have, your actions need to represent working towards those in a reasonable way. And then it's holding people accountable to whatever those are. And sometimes that's a conversation with the athlete of like, hey, we have this goal. What are your expectations on how you're going to get there so that I can hold you accountable for them? But we run a team that's comprised of a lot of individuals in an individual sport. And so the unifying concept is like simple messaging, like effort and attitude. And then finding ways to support those across the board.
Yeah. It's really this thing that I've been thinking about lately of like creating like team standards and non-negotiables.
Yeah.
Of trying to figure out how to set those up and how to instill those with every athlete and kind of figure out how to put these expectations on these athletes. Do you have something like that, or do you kind of create them individualistically?
It's probably more individually. I mean, we certainly have like minimum expectations for everybody. Be a good person, respect people, all of those things, right? And like those are like the minimum requirement for life. So those pieces are certainly important, but those pieces aren't things that like I harp on, because here for us, like we just don't tolerate things that don't fit that mold. And usually, individuals who struggle with those pieces, like they tend to weed themselves out. But it's more an individual approach. Like I want everybody who comes here to feel supported in whatever it is that they're doing. And for a lot of people, it's unnecessary to hold them at an incredibly high standard that you would hold another athlete. Like we have to recognize that the people who walk into the gym are all walking in for a different reason. And then it's our job as coaches to understand that reason and then hold the expectation to whatever's going to fit for that. And it always looks different.
Yeah. Is such a interesting framework to kind of navigate, of having to figure each athlete out individually. Do you like write down their goals on like a common page? I switched some of my athletes to Everfit from Train Heroic, and I noticed there's so many of these little pages and tasks that I can use in these check-in forms. That's been really nice to try and like test around with, where I can put what their goals are, and we can put this thing I've used of performance and improvement plans of like, how are we going to improve? What are you saying you want? What do you want from me? How do you want that encouragement to look? Do you have anywhere that you kind of write those things down as a coach?
So what our system looks like is one, whenever an athlete comes in, like that's really one of the first questions. Like, what are you looking to get out of this in the sport and then in working with us? And then let's have a conversation as to what that looks like. If someone tells me I want to make I want to make senior nationals, right? Let's have a conversation as to where we are and like, what does that look like in your life where you're at now? And then we do monthly check-ins that are calls that are like have to happen for the remote side. And then really like the biggest place that we get a pulse check on that is after every event. So after every event, we kind of have like a debrief. I meet with everybody and we talk about how did we go leading up to this and what do we need to adjust that we're doing, either from a training perspective, outside of training, mental side, and like how are we approaching things for whatever the goal is that we have, and do we feel like what we've been doing is working? And if it's not, then what adjustments do we need to make? Those conversations, I think, are some of the most impactful. And then it's also making sure that your athletes know that like it's an open door, and like they can talk to me whenever, like shoot me a text, shoot me a call. Let's have a conversation. If an athlete feels a certain way, 99.9% of the time, there's a decent amount of truth in it. And so from a coaching perspective, just listening to them usually gives you like all that you need for how to respond or make adjustments when it comes to goals and having those conversations.
How do you kind of do you have a format or a system of how you have these calls to be the most effective, or do you just kind
Yeah.
of hop
So
on?
so I have like a general outline, right? And as the more that you work with an athlete, the more you realize that there's certain pieces of that are way more important for that person than others. So, like with those calls, the general outline is in the last 2 weeks, what went well, what didn't go well, and let's talk about those. And why do we think it went well, and why do we think it didn't go well? And then in the next 2 weeks, what adjustments do we need to make? Either from a programming perspective, let's talk about that. From a technical perspective, are we not getting something? Or from a life perspective. And then from there, like, let's talk like big picture, long-term stuff. And that's just a time for us to say like, hey, a year ago when we first came on, like this is what you said your goal was. Is it still the goal? Because a lot of times those change, and a lot of times those conversations don't happen when they change. And then big picture wise, like what are we doing to get to that point? And then from there, like we'll chat upcoming meets, events. But some athletes, like it turns to, hey, let's just chat about life. Are we struggling with something? And other athletes, like, let's pull up videos and let's just go over technical stuff that has been a dumpster fire for us in the last 2 weeks that we need to find a way to reapproach and think about.
Yeah. How long do these calls usually take?
Minimum 20 minutes. I've had ones that have been like an hour and a half. It depends if everything is sunshine and rainbows in that 2 weeks. Like we have 20 minutes, let's crush it. We're good. And other times, like we need to sort through more things. But I'd say on average, probably about 30, 40 minutes.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
They're I try and do them. I like go ebb and flow through like the monthly ones and try and figure that out. So right now I'm trying to test like weekly check-ins to try and see if they understand like the goals, what's kind of going on. And then one thing that I've been trying to push into is one section of like, how have you been vulnerable or courageous this week? Because that's kind of what I'm trying to push towards these athletes when we get into this society norms nowadays of like hiding yourself off. Instagram shows so much of just everything's perfect, all of that, and trying to like build this level of like courage and vulnerability with all my athletes. So I've been trying to work on that, and it's been really interesting to see what each athlete says and does, and which athletes kind of like shy away, and then trying to dig into like why are they shying away from that. Now, Freudian, you usually come into something happened in childhood, but that's a completely different
Yeah. A lot of
conversation.
times when it comes to check-ins, like, just sit back and let them talk. Like you get a lot in the frequency of the check-ins. Like we push out an automated message that's like, hey, you haven't had your monthly check-in, like we need to schedule it. But the link stays live for us. So somebody could schedule a check-in every week. They could schedule more than one in a week. Like, it's always live. There is no limit to how often those can happen. Um, and certainly, like, the frequency as to when those happen alone sometimes tells you a story as to where things are at.
I'm reading this book right now just on kind of culture, and it's talking about this concept of like the Toyota way. Have you heard about that?
The what?
The Toyota way, like
No.
the car
Mm.
brand. So essentially, what happens is they want a constant level of improvement, and they want their workers or their employees to always be telling them what's wrong or any little thing, and so they always have this. They might have a cable or they might have a check-in system where athletes can tell them what's going on. And one of the problems when they first came to the U.S. Uh, was nobody wanted to kind of pull that because they've been taught that it's a sign of weakness, versus slowly building that culture, that value in that communication.
Mm.
So how have you kind of opened that door for your athletes and taught them that it's okay, especially if they're coming in from another coaching system that might not have been so open or communicative in that process?
Yeah, a lot of times it's tough. It's kind of like you got to peel back the layers a little bit. Um, and certainly, like, in the last 10 years of doing this, on more than one occasion, like, sometimes you're unsuccessful in really getting to that point. Like, I think the biggest issue is sometimes coaches feel that, like, they have to fix everything, right? So when an athlete comes to them and they're talking to them about the bad day that they had, and they, have somebody who's ill in their family, and they're not sleeping well and they're not eating well, and whatever the turmoil that they may be having inside of the gym, outside of the gym, sometimes they're not looking for you to tell them a solution. They're just looking for someone that'll sit there and listen and be supportive. And I think in the athletes that have came on in other coaching systems, their hesitancy to have those conversations comes from either in a previous sport or in weightlifting, somebody trying to tell them how to fix it all. And that's either someone saying, like, hey, sport's hard, you got to be tough, which most time isn't super helpful. Sometimes it's necessary. Um, but, or it's a scenario where, like, a, an athlete has a bad week and they say, like, hey, everything's kind of gone to shit this week. I have this, and this. And the coach says, well, instead of doing 5 days, let's do 3 days this week, like, immediately. And the athlete doesn't want that. They just had a bad week. And they just want to let you know, and they want to talk to you about it, and that's it. So I'm like a big, big, big proponent of not everything needs a solution. Sometimes you just need to listen to what your athletes are telling you and then evaluate, does that mean we need an adjustment or not? Every time an athlete has a bad session, as coaches, we don't run to our laptops to change the program. We wait, and we see it through. And if we have a pattern of problems, we create changes. Sometimes when it comes to emotional or mental support in the sport, it works the same way. One bad day, one bad week, one bad session, turmoil in life doesn't immediately call for an adjustment. Um, and sometimes you just need to be that person that can sit there and listen to them and be like, hey, it's going to be fine. It'll be all right.
How do you navigate well, for me, sometimes my ego can start to ramp up, and I'll feel this need of like fixing instead of wanting to let it kind of play out. How have you kind of worked through those feelings?
Yeah. So I can tell you, like, years ago, at the smallest sign of a problem, I always felt like I have to fix it, right? Like if training isn't going well and we're struggling, there is 100 different reasons as to why that could be the case. Sure, some of the times it can be a programming thing. We as coaches are not perfect, right? Sometimes we'll write a training plan and it doesn't go the way that we thought it would. However, you have to recognize that there's so many reasons. It could be one of those 100 that's causing that, and it's absolutely out of your control. Maybe there's an adjustment that you need to make if that issue is repetitive. And usually, what that looks like is scaling down what training looks like a little bit. But you just have to be at peace with like you you're not going to fix everything all the time. And a lot of times it may not be something that you can fix. Coaching is supporting athletes through a journey. There is not a coach on this planet who can say or should say, that athlete is who they are because of me. You play a role. In some scenarios, you play a large role. In some scenarios, it's smaller. We're a piece to the puzzle. And as coaches, we just need to make sure that our piece is as good as it possibly can be. And then the rest of the pieces, we just support. But it's hard when something comes up and you're super invested in the success of your athletes and you want to see them do well and it's not going well. The natural thing I think is like to fix it. But sometimes the fixing comes on the athlete's end and you just have to support that.
Yeah, I remember when I was first coming into coaching, all of my like coaching mentors, or like the ones that I was trying to mimic, were very controlling, like had everything controlled. So then that's what I would start doing, and I would try and be like, okay, this is exactly what happens. I was like a no miss kind of system. Like we were, I was putting numbers on the page that were 100% accurate and all of that kind of stuff. And I would hold these athletes to these goals of like what I kind of expected. So I ended up having 2 knee surgeries and being out of the sport for 3 years. And now that I'm coming back, when I started coming back, I started realizing that I was putting all of this expectation and this pressure on these goals onto these athletes that I was like, well, why wouldn't you want to go to nationals? And it's like a 30-year-old with kids or something, or like these responsibilities and a full-time job. And I would treat them that way, and I would spend all of this time and effort, and I would be so frustrated and be like, I'm putting all of this time and effort into you, and then uh, be like, why aren't you doing that? And it took me a long time to kind of pull that back and start realizing that it's not about me, and that it's like, okay, I need to figure out how to communicate this to this athlete and navigate that situation. And so becoming more like athlete centered and pushing into that realm, one of the things that I've really enjoyed is that my girlfriend's a figure skating coach that kind of taught me is like giving them a choice. So she works with a lot of youth, and they'll be very frustrated and they'll start having meltdowns or whatever. And she'll be like, okay, you can either do this or this, instead of being like, what do you want to do or something like that. It's like you give them options of what you think is the right area until they start to build that uh, level of autonomy and self-reflection. Because I found like at the start, if you've had somebody coming from what I created or that more controlled environment, slowly building their abilities to have that autonomy through good choices that they have positive effect has been really, really good. Where it's like, okay, when they're having a really big struggle week, it's like, do you think we need to change anything, or should we just keep at it? And do you think this is going to be fixed in the short term? And almost always they're like, it'll be fixed. And what I used to do is I'd be like, okay, your fatigue or your readiness is dropped by like 3 points on train heroic. So I need to adjust these 3 things, like you were kind of mentioning. and adjust all of these things, and I would rush and stress and try and make it all perfect. And then it's just like, why did I do that? Like, nothing's perfect. Humans aren't perfect. And there's this podcast I've been listening, Coach Him Up with Tim Riley, but he was talking about posting posting on social media or writing a program, and you're struggling to like post because you want it to be perfect. And he's like, how dare you think you're so good that you deserve that? And that one just like hit me right in the ego, where I was like, yeah, how dare I try and make these things perfect?
Yeah, I think it's one of the toughest things that I learned early on was that high performance or coaching people to all be as competitive as they possibly can be is part of the job. It's not the job. Um, I started in a environment that was all 18, 19, 20 year olds who were college students who there was no reason that they couldn't train super hard and be super focused and dedicate a ton of time and energy and stuff like that to the sport. And then came out of that and started coaching Gen Pop, anybody who walked through the door. And it's just like you, I used to be like, well, I don't understand why you wouldn't want to train as much as possible and try to be as good as you possibly can be and make all these sacrifices, go to nationals and all of try to get all the accolades. And you just come to realize that, again, that everybody who walks through your door walks through for a different reason. And the way that I learned that was I had a guy that I coached who weightlifted with me for like 4 or 5 years, and like had just a massive transformation as a person during that time, um, and became good friends with him. And when he decided to step away from the sport, like sent me a letter, um, and in that letter, like basically just outlined how impactful being a part of the sport and what came personally for him through it. There was not a single mention. He went to national meets. Um, there was not a single mention about anything competing. There wasn't a single mention about a PR. There was nothing that's measurable in the sport or that anybody aims for was mentioned in like this really long, thought out, heartfelt letter. It was all stuff that was personally impactful to him on what he personally gained through his time in weightlifting. And when I got that letter, I was like, I think for most people, like this is more what it's about. And the other stuff is just cool things you get to do because weightlifting has the opportunities to do it. And that was definitely like a mindset shift a little bit for me.
If you were to like pick one of like the high performance or that kind of like long-term transformational aspect, because I mean there's going to be areas of both within each of them. Is there one that you think that you would kind of align best with?
As far as like either on the high performance side or on the personal side,
Yeah.
um, well, I can tell you this: uh, coaching on the high performance side, it's really rewarding in like being able to progress through the sport in that way and be a part of it. Um, and certainly, like it's a big part of what I do now. Um, with that being said, I do get more enjoyment of taking someone to the Virus Series 1, the Arnold, in a D session and having them go 6 for 6. And like the excitement that they get is a completely different level of excitement someone gets when they win an international meet. In that same breath, from a coaching perspective, like the D session at the Arnold is way more fun. Like it's way more fun. Like everybody's laughing, everybody's having a good time. There's no stress. Like we just want to go like do this thing and enjoy it and love the sport and be around the team and all that stuff. When we go to a world championships, it's just everything about it's like a stressful experience. You know, like the travel makes it more stressful. The food makes it more stressful. It's like a super high stakes environment. It's not like the people in the back room are like super nice to each other. It's generally kind of the opposite. Um, so, it's certainly hard for me to pick because they're just two like very different experiences. By nature, I'm somebody who's highly competitive. Um, so I love the international side of weightlifting. Um, but like the personal fulfillment and enjoyment of coaching the everyday athlete uh, it's just different. Like it is just different, and I don't think it matters how long I do this for. I think I'll always remain a part of that.
Yeah, I put you in an impossible question with that
Yeah,
dichotomy.
yeah,
That's not real.
it's so different. Yeah.
Um, it was funny. We had nationals here in May, and my girlfriend got to see the back room. So we had it in like a soccer arena, like an
Mm-hmm.
indoor soccer arena, where they have the stands kind of above. So she got to watch in, and she comes from figure skating, and she just comes from what would feel like that international where everything's so stressful. There's so many stakes. The athletes just like glare at each other. There's no like camaraderie. And then she watched weightlifting nationals here in Canada, and it's like everybody was like laughing together. They're all like cheering each other on. The athletes would like come around the corner that are directly competing against each other
Yeah.
and like cheer when the
Yeah.
athletes would make them and beat them. And it's such like a vastly different vibe that's so much fun. And I was doing this one session with one of the athletes that I run through, and it was like the heavy men's session. And it was like the most fun session I've ever had in my life because it was just a bunch of big dogs laughing and joking around with each other. One guy was saying like trains coming to the station, and I was like, oh, this is great. I love this. And then you get to some meets where it's like a local meet, and then all of a sudden everybody just puts all this pressure and this like stress on. It's like we lose out on how much fun this sport can be when you switch that mindset from we get to have this opportunity to compete to like this is a threat now. And I think that's a hard thing as a coach that I've been trying to navigate lately of uh, this compete every day or this like compete with the non-competitive athletes or like teaching them that it's not this threat, that's this opportunity that we get to challenge ourselves and build up their competency. Because what I've found is the athletes that have a lot of athletic experience or a lot of sport experience tend to be in more of that boat where it's like, oh, I get to do this. I love competing. I love doing this. But the ones that had a little bit worse of an experience or quit early or is new to it really struggle with like, this could hurt my identity. If I miss this lift, coach is going to be disappointed or my fans or anything like that. How have you kind of navigated building those kind of concepts up in your athletes of like we get to compete, we want to like push ourselves and challenge ourselves, and it's more of this opportunity versus a threat?
Yeah. I think the number one thing is not forcing them to do it. It used to be something where I never required it, but like it was heavily encouraged that you go to XYZ meet. Um, and generally, like the athletes who I had to like really push hard to go to a meet, they just weren't in the same headspace as those who from the jump were excited to go do it. Now it's an option for everybody if they want to go to a meet or not. And if they want to go, like, awesome. I want everybody to go do every meet that we do, right? Um, but in giving that choice, I think that it starts the experience with a positive experience. It's the same reason why I don't ever force somebody and tell them, like, okay, it's time to do your first meet. Like, I want it to be an individual decision for them to say, like, I want to go do this. And then they go to that first meet, and the only thing that matters at that meet is having a positive experience. The numbers are irrelevant. It's have a positive experience. I'm not going to tell them like, hey, after weigh-ins, go find somewhere quiet and relax and, like go have fun. Like go weigh in and go hang out with people. If you want to go watch the session before, which is usually like not the most ideal thing to do, go watch the session. Same thing in a national meet. Like if it's someone's first national meet, I want them to leave that experience and have loved every aspect of it and want to come back to the next one. So for me, it's like make it their decision, right? You can give them all the tools and encourage them that they're ready and that I think you would really enjoy this event. And I think that it would be great for you. And, this, that, and the other person from the team is going, maybe that they're really good friends with, and you encourage that. But when they make that decision, it's having a conversation with them as to what are our goals for the meet, and like let's make sure that like we really have a good time here, so that then it lays this foundation for what they come to expect whenever we say like, hey, there's a meet, do you want to do it? And then if somebody says they don't want to, we don't really push them. We may ask why, just understand where their head's at. But if they say like, I think I just want to sit this one out and train a bit, or I have life going on, it's respecting that and just saying, cool, like we'll catch you on the next one. And so that every time they go to a meet, like it's a positive experience. They may not always do well at the meet, right? That's going to happen. But the social side, the enjoyment, the traveling, whatever it may be, they enjoy it. And then that just makes convincing people to compete tenfold easier. You don't have to do it anymore because they love doing it.
Yeah. We kind of talked earlier, I think it was off camera, of the differences between like Canadian and US like local meets, where Canada's a little bit more rigid. We have a little bit more rules. It's a little more serious. All of our TOs are supposed to wear like full IWF like jacket,
At a local
dress
meet.
shirt. That's what, at least in Alberta, is the precedent, and so it's starting to come down a little bit. But that's what was kind of set. So every time my new athletes would kind of go in, it's like we have curtains closing everything off. Everything's serious. Everything's and so what I kind of built in the past like year and a half is I started doing club meets or like these mock meets prior, where it's like, okay, I'm gonna like run through what a competition feels like, what it kind of looks like. We'll kind of talk it through. It'll be a slow paced one. Uh, and then that's what I've kind of tried to push for my like learn to lift or my new athletes to kind of test it out and be like, this is what it kind of feels like, looks like. If you want to kind of just watch and see what it looks like and not do it, that's totally fine. And then it gives them that positive experience of like, okay, it's potentially just me sitting in that reffing chair where it's a little less serious. I'm just like, you have 10 minutes to warm up, then you're going to do all three lifts, and then the next person goes, kind of thing. And then it builds into those next competitions. And something that I've had to work at because of my original coaches would be like, we're opening at 98%. And then I would go 2 for 6. I won. So like on like a record scale, like I did really good. But the competition anxiety was so high all the time because it was like, oh, you're gonna go into your first meet and you go 3 for 6, 2 for 6. And so what I've started doing with the athletes is like I'll do that mock meet, and then I'll move that forward into like we're only gonna touch like 95%, 96% for our third, where it's like building that confidence and confidence, where it's like, okay, we take these first three, we get our first competition 5 or 6 for 6, then the next competition we like ramp it up 2-3%, and then we keep going from there. And then as they go, I start to build in this autonomy where it's like, what do you want to take for your third? Like I'll build this level of like, okay, now you get to decide. Because one of the things that I took from, I think a lot of weightlifting coaches use Coach Now, but they talked about these 3 stages of athletes. It kind of aligns with the motor learning, like cognitive, associative, but it's directive, calibrative, and collaborative. So an athlete's life stage that can ebb and flow, goes through this directive where it's like, I'm telling you what to do because you generally don't have that much idea, where it's like, okay, we're gonna take these lighter attempts to feel really confident. And what they'll see from other clubs, or what you'll see from other things, is like, I want to max out, I want to PR, and then they miss two lifts and then they're really bummed out. So sometimes, like, taking their autonomy away of like, this is why we're doing this, I just want this to be really enjoyable, I want to build that up. And then calibrative is this, like, what did that feel like, what do you want to do? And then it's like, oh, I think we should take this, or I think this would be the right call. And it's like calibrating them into what kind of makes sense, because sometimes egos can get a little high, or emotions or anything like that. So it's just bringing them back. And then the collaborative's like, okay, I want you to start making decisions for yourself, where it's like, what do you think we should take? And I build that up over like 2-3 competitions, where it's like, okay, now I want you to start to tell me, and we build this trust of like, no, we should take this because of this reason. Or some athletes will be like, I want this autonomy. And some athletes will be like, no, I want you to just tell me what to do. I don't want to have to think about it. And it gives us this framework of being able to find that for each athlete and find out what works, is something that I've kind of played around with a lot lately.
Yeah, I think that's like been a natural thing for us, and I probably never realized it. Where like you're talking about it, and I'm like, yeah, this is where that athlete's at, and this is where that athlete's at, and so on and so forth. But yeah, I think an independent athlete is the best type of athlete to have. Somebody who's not fully and completely reliant on you to tell them everything, uh, is where you want to be. Like, and it's not a process that you want to necessarily like accelerate as quickly as possible. But when somebody gets there, you know that we're in a really good spot. Um, and luckily, I've had a lot of athletes that I've worked with for a really long time. And when you get to that point, that third stage where it's really collaborative, just, it's way more enjoyable. Like, it's a fun time. You feel like you are going through the sport together. Um, and it just makes it way more freaking enjoyable, you know? And the athletes who are earlier on in those stages, it's not at their fault. It's just the learning process. But when an athlete gets more into the sport and they start to have thoughts and ideas on maybe some of their programming or opinions when it comes, and they say like, hey, I feel like I'm really ready for this number in a meet, and this is why, like, you know that they're starting to really get it and like hit their stride.
Yeah. When I start each process kind of like the process before, or the stage before. So it'll be like, when they're in that directive stage, I'll start asking them what they're feeling like. So more in a motor learning sense, or like in a that kind of sense, I'll like ask them, and they'll have no idea
Oh
when
yeah,
they
yeah,
first
yeah.
start
They'd be like,
their
I don't know.
weightlifting. What does that even mean?
Yeah,
You'll be like, did you feel the bars sweep back? They're like,
yeah.
what?
It's
That
even
that
if you
means
ask an
nothing.
athlete, did that feel heavy? Like, I don't know. Like, okay, sounds
Or
good.
they'll muscle snatch it, and you'll be like, was that heavy? They're like, yep. You're like, that was supposed to be a squat snatch, like a regular snatch, but all right.
Yeah.
And I'll start asking them, and I'll get them started in the process of getting to that next stage, where it's, I'm like, okay, I need to start prepping this athlete, regardless of what I'm doing in that stage,
Mhm.
where it's like, it matters a little bit more when we get to like that calibrative stage, where it's like, I need them to start thinking about what's happening, that self discovery, that self reflection in the stage before, when they have no idea, just so they start that process and build that habit of like, what just happened. And then from that stage is like, I start asking them what they thought happened, and like what they think should happen. And then I want them to start being like, I have say, and I'll start building these little wins, or these little choices that they can make into their program, or into whatever that kind of looks like. And I'll start building those up, because kind of like we were talking about earlier, it's like, you want to build their abilities and build their competency in making decisions. You don't want to just like open the floodgates of like, you can just make these giant decisions, because then what happens is, all of a sudden, nobody's doing split squats, nobody's doing accessories. They're like, I just need to max out every day.
Mm-hmm.
But like slowly building those up and making them have this ability to make these decisions or tell you this feedback, kind of like the Toyota way of like, you want to be able to build them to be able to tell you. But if you don't start those processes early on, then they don't build that competency or that self awareness of what they need to improve, what they need to tell you about, what that kind of looks like,
Yeah,
which
I
is
completely agree.
sweet.
Spot on.
Thank goodness. Yeah, it's crazy. The further you get in coaching, where your mindset goes from where it kind of originates. Because I was so like, I'm gonna tell you everything very not transactional because it was very transformational and like the mental habits and the emotional habits. But like in the program itself, I started so like my way or the highway. There's no telling me. And then it's slowly building over time. You start seeing like I get better impact, better buy-in, better trust when I'm like, what do you think we should work on? And you let yourself be the guide or you let them kind of be a part of that process. And then they're like, okay, I want to do this instead of I have to do split squats. Sometimes I'm like, I know you hate split squats, but they're still going in there.
Yeah, it just comes down to trusting your athletes. Like they, sure, like early on, they may have those thoughts, but maybe they need vetted a little more. Um, and then maybe there's a conversation as to like why that may or may not be a great idea. But the more that you trust them, the easier your job gets. And I can tell you that as athletes progress in higher levels, like it's almost it, it is extremely necessary to have that collaboration, or it's really hard to be successful. Um, and from the day somebody walks through the door, like I immediately trust their feedback and what they feel and what they have to say. And then as coaches, like you sometimes have to do a little bit of like an evaluation on if that warrants a change or what they're asking for at that time or not. Um, but it starts with making a space where athletes feel as though that they're able to do that. And once they're able to do that, coaching and helping them gets a lot easier.
Kind of going into like that remote athlete section. How do you instill like kind of the culture or the values or what you want outside of like the check-ins in
Yeah,
those athletes?
yeah. So I think, well, one, social media helps us. Um, we have a lot of athletes who are really active on social media, and that helps in a communication platform from athlete to athlete. I think that a lot of them do a really good job of connecting with remote athletes together, um, and the athletes who have been here for a while, um, like emulate that culture a bit, and that certainly helps making those connections athlete to athlete. Um, Being at meets, at national meets, really helps, especially in back rooms, because they can kind of see the way we conduct things in a back room and the more exposure they get. And outside of that, like it just comes from developing a relationship with the athlete. Um, and those check-ins are a big part of it. But even just through like the daily video review process on Train Heroic and what that feedback looks like, that is a place where you can start to lay the foundation for what we want that culture or expectations to be. But it certainly is way more challenging with the remote side than it is in person, way more. But I think it's just over time you develop that relationship and they get exposure and conversation. And when those opportunities present itself, you're just kind of keeping your eye out for areas of opportunity where you can have conversations on things that we think are really important and would resonate or a change that we could make that would be positive. But yeah, certainly the remote side, it's tough all around. It's a different challenge than in person, um, but the athletes that we have done an incredible job of creating an atmosphere and culture that I don't even feel the need to really inject myself in very often. Um, so I like tip my hat to all of the athletes for making the culture and the team what it really is. At this point, like, I just support it. You know?
You're just hanging out.
Yeah, I just support it. Like, you know, you have conversations at times and you play your role in it, but like truly, like I play a role. Um, and it's not much more than that.
One of the things that I found that I've struggled with is like in person, I can have these conversations or like go through this motivational interviewing or open ask these open-ended questions to try and get those athletes to start thinking about it. And it's hard to kind of like I'll say vibe check through like the Train Heroic or Coach
Yeah.
Now or whatever app you're using of like asking why they feel a certain way. Because a lot of I have a framework of how I want my video review, so I don't want them to just send me videos. Because I think them just sending you videos becomes this thing of just here's the checkbox that I did.
Yeah.
So how I kind of format it is I go through like a what, why, how. So what are we working on? What's happening in your life? That kind of stuff. Why is like why are you doing it? That one came in because of social media. I had athletes like uh, I saw Greg Everett or Dylan Cooper's video on this, so I just started doing it. And they wouldn't tell me until like 4 weeks later. And I'd be like, why does your lift look so different all of a sudden? They're like, oh, I saw this, so I've just been doing that. And I'm like, that's the complete opposite of what we're working on right now. We got to go back. And then the how is like, how did it feel? How did that cue work? How did it go essentially? And they'll give you a little bit more information, more feedback in there. And then I started just like asking what I would normally ask in person as like just open-ended questions instead of giving them feedback because sometimes it's like they get the same feedback over and over again versus asking like an open-ended question of like uh, what are you struggling with conceptually or physically to get the bar to move back off the ground, like what are you feelings happening or why do you think you're struggling with it, and then it opens up that door. What can be difficult is kind of like vibe checking it because in person they're not going to be like, well, I don't know. Versus online or social media or on these apps, I find like it's a little easier to disconnect that and just be like, give like an easy answer, and
Ooh,
there's
that's
no
good. I
like,
might steal that from you.
that's okay, sounds
Yeah,
good.
might take that. Yeah, I find the biggest thing is the simple text of like how we doing this week. Oftentimes elicits a response that doesn't isn't. It's way more insightful. Like I'll get a paragraph back that gives me like a rundown on like everything that you can imagine. Um, and those, even if you know we did tons of video review throughout the week on Train Heroic, like I'll still send the text. Um, and outside of that, like I have like my athletes can call me at any time. Um, you know, if it's like 10 p.m., might be sleeping, right? But outside of that, um, if they have a question or they want to call and chat about something, they don't need to schedule a time. They can just call me. This is all I do. It's all I do all day long. So, and largely what I do is remote. Um, so, having the open lines of communications for athletes to feel as though that they can call and chat. And then when every time I have a conversation with an athlete, I make sure it's not just about technique. Like, let's talk about the mental side or the emotional side of sport. Um, and make sure that we're also addressing that every time we have a conversation. I think the technical side is incredibly important. With that being said, the space in weightlifting that is always lacking seems to be the mental side of weightlifting. Um, I think it's the lowest hanging fruit for like every athlete. Uh, and I think for us, I think it's part of the reason that a lot of our athletes have had a lot of success is we can write a program, we can give feedback on technique, we can get you really strong, do all of those things. And it's great when those things happen. But if we're not evaluating the mental side of weightlifting, the ceiling is much lower than what they realize. So it's just making sure that every time we get to have a conversation, even if it's through Train Heroic, like I'll ask questions back that elicit a response that's not always just, yeah, I feel like, after the hip, the bar's getting away from me and this is why. Like let's talk about things that aren't just snatching and clean and jerking all the time.
Yep. I know you have been working with the sports psychologist a little bit lately. What have been some of the key takeaways that you've kind of taken from that?
Man, they're a game changer for us. She, our sports psychologist, actually went to school with Dave, who I started 1440 with. She was a weightlifter, which is like massive. So when somebody says like, I'm clarking, she knows what that is. She's clarked before. Like she knows, she gets it. So, it's interesting. Like I've had conversations with her and sometimes like we're on completely different wavelengths, with how we would approach something. So I've taken a lot of stuff from a coaching perspective on how to approach certain scenarios that like actually work and aren't just me losing my mind. Um, but I think I will say when it comes to that, like I really trust her to let her do her thing. When an athlete starts working with a sports psychologist and then they come to me with that same issue, like my number one question is, well, what has she told you? And then it's having that conversation and making sure that I'm like agreeing and reiterating like those things or giving a different approach or like, well, why don't they voice something to me and it's have you talk to her about that and let's have a conversation with her. But personally, my biggest takeaways, probably one of the most like recent ones, we dealt with a clarking issue in here. Like it was like the plague. Uh, and to me, as an individual, I can't conceptualize it. Like the concept of clarking makes zero sense to me. Like I don't know how it happens, right? And I know it happens, and that it's fine. I just can't wrap my head around it. And I think people who have never clarked, like they have a hard time understanding it. And part of that is like back when I used to train, like it would almost have been like a non-accepted thing, right? Like if you clarked, you were kind of just like berated a bit, you know?
Bullied.
Yes, pretty much. I trained in like an atmosphere of like just 10 dudes being dudes.
Dudes
And
being bros.
yeah, just bros being bros and like a male coach and like this like dungeon with no windows. And it was just photos of like old Russian weightlifting on the walls, right? And so like you just didn't clark, you just didn't. And we developed an issue where I had like 6 athletes that all were like in the same space clarking. Um, and she was working on with it with a handful of athletes. And I just swore, I was like, I don't know what we're doing, but it's not working. Because it's still happening, and it's like happening in numbers that we shouldn't be fucking. So I called her and I was having a conversation with her, and she explained it in a way of like, hey, like the worst thing you can do with clarking is have a negative response. Because my response was negative. I would, especially on the high performance side, like I would get really frustrated. And, it was basically like, hey, like we need to get it the heck together type of response. I just didn't know any better. She was basically like, the worst response you can have is negative. It just is going to reinforce clarking. They're going to the athletes are going to have more anxiety about clarking because we're, from a coaching perspective, like instilling a negative response to it every time it happens. So I basically like just flipped the switch on it and like stepped away. And when it happened, like it was like, it's totally fine. Let's wave, or let's just drop down under that number. And like what we do today, like it's totally fine. And it was just a ton of like positive reinforcement, which was challenging at times. But that like just small snippet of like just positively reinforce that issue all the time, no matter the circumstance, and it'll stop happening. In my mind, I was like, no way that's going to work. It worked. Uh, it worked. And so she's definitely made a huge impact. That's just an example of like something so simple that it was just a change of like how I was responding to something that made a difference for not just one athlete, but like all of them. And, you know, she works with athletes on different stuff. She came to a training camp that we did and did like a really cool exercise to kind of identify weak points on the mental side of the sport. And that was really cool and insightful. But her Instagram handle is KB Mental Performance. If there's anybody who's like, I need somebody, I highly recommend talking to her. Highly recommend it.
One of the big changes that I had to make is I'll have a full on RBF. If I'm thinking about something, I'll just be like so mad. I look so mad. And so I started having to like smile at club to make it feel more positive. If I'm just like blank face, I'll look angry. If I'm thinking, like my eyes will squinch or scrunch together. And so I started having to like open my face and smile more, just so my athletes don't think I'm judging them or mad at them. Because all of a sudden people were like, "What did I do wrong? What was wrong with that?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm just thinking. I'm sorry." And so I'll be like,
Yeah. Yeah.
just like this creepy Joker smile is
Yeah.
what it feels like to me. But then if I ever don't do it, they're like, "What did I do?" And I was like, "Oh no."
Yeah. It's crazy. Like you just don't realize like the body language that you have, like athletes notice everything. And sometimes like it's tough to put the not have your emotions on your face. In that Clarking issue, like my emotions were so on my face, it was incredible. It was, you know, and like in hindsight, like I was like an idiot, you know, like I was like, why? If I just would have been, you know, just way more positive reinforcement from the beginning, like we probably would have not had this issue for nearly as long. But what you don't know, you don't know, you know.
100%.
And for me, it was like I approached it with tough love, and that wasn't the approach that worked. Um, and just what you don't know, and that's coaching
It's
one.
hard
Plenty of
as
time
a
that just keeps happening.
um kind of going into like what would you want an athlete to feel like their experience is leaving or being a part of 1440?
That's a good question. I want athletes to feel like one, this is a place that they come where, regardless of who they are, they mesh into the whole. Um, you know, on this team, like we have so many unique individuals and personalities and walks of life, and like it's incredible how well it works, especially in a time, especially in the United States, where like everybody is very opinionated strongly in certain directions, right? Um, and in here, like those opinions vary a ton, but it's really rewarding and incredible to still have an environment in a time like that where everybody feels supported. and can be who they want to be at all times and not have to worry about it. So that piece is important to me. Outside of that, like, of course, I want athletes to be happy with the experience that they're having in weightlifting, whatever those goals may be. It makes zero difference to me. I just want them to feel happy and satisfied with the process that they're going through while they're chasing them. Because again, like I said in the beginning, this sport is hard. It never really gets easier. You just understand it more. And during the process of the journey of weightlifting, whatever that may be for a person, like, I want them to feel like they're enjoying it and they're happy along the way. Outside of that, like, I just want athletes to have a good time. I want them to be successful, and hopefully it's something that is rewarding for them individually, like in their lives holistically, not just in weightlifting.
I think that's a very noble way of viewing it. Just wanting them to enjoy and being individualistic in what their goals are.
Yeah.
I think it takes time, like we mentioned earlier, just getting there. It's hard to mentally wrap your head around, and then you realize you did things that are the complete opposite of actually doing that, and then just like slowly being like, oh, that was not it. That was not it. Um, as a young high performance coach,
Mm-hmm.
what have been some of your struggles or your main issues developing through the sport, getting to that international stage?
Ooh, boy. Yeah, it's one of those situations where, like, you don't know what you don't know. I've been lucky enough to go on these international trips with coaches who are older than me that are, like, incredibly supportive and sharing the knowledge that they have. Um, when I first went on an international trip, I recognized that I knew nothing compared to the large majority of the people that were there. Um, and I think in coaching, any coaching, like, that's one of the hardest things to admit, is that in this room, I am the least experienced person. Um, and so that first one that I went on, which was Youth Worlds in Saudi Arabia, um, I, like, barely spoke the entire time. And the reason is, like, I would go sit at a table with coaches and, like, I would just listen to everything that anybody had to say. And when I left the trip, like, I went on the next one and the next one and so on and so forth. I started talking more and so on and so forth, and kind of more being myself. And, like, I think everybody thought that I was just like this mute, didn't speak individual, because I just didn't talk. Like, I just saw it as a really good opportunity for, like, a week's worth of understanding this sport at that level with people who have coached Olympians or whatever that may be, which, like, I had no, I'd never been to an international meet. The whole thing was a learning process for me. And at that time I was 20, 25, 20, 20, 25, something like that, 26. And so, like, I wasn't foolish enough to be like, I have this thing figured out. Like, I'm here, I got an athlete here, I know everything I need to know. Certainly, like, there's been occasions where, as the younger guy, there's been occasions of, like, well, questioning, I guess, is the best way to put it. Which is fine and fair. I never took offense to anything. I was, especially in the early times of doing that, like, I was really there to learn, and I still am. But I think that you garnish the respect as a coach by being a receptive person to people's opinions, and also understanding that, like, you don't know everything, and even some of the things that you think you know may be wrong. Early on, I made a plethora of mistakes, from when I first started coaching. Like, I look back at some of the first programs I wrote, and I'm like, I don't know why it makes no sense. And even to guide an athlete through the progression at an international level, a plethora, tons of mistakes. And certainly, like, one of the most challenging things was just staying like to terms with myself of like, you need to keep getting better and you need to learn, and you are young and you are less experienced. And at that point, I had been coaching at a national level and had people win this, that, and the other thing. And it was like just a constant reminder that you got to keep figuring more out. And still to this day, I usually think always, I'm actually not sure there's ever been a time where I've been on an international trip that someone was the same age as me or younger. It's still just
The young
constantly trying
buck.
to learn and understand people. Like, there's a lot of really good people in USA weightlifting.
Uh, how do you navigate outside of those international competitions in that coach development? I know there's these training camps, these biomechanics research that some of your athletes have been to. So I'd love if you went into kind of that and then into how you do it outside of kind of those international meets where you get to hang out with those coaches.
Yeah, so certainly like the training camps are helpful. Early on, like some of the training camps that I was at, there was more of an educational piece, which was really beneficial. Like some of the developmental camps and things like that. I think as of lately, some of the ones that I've been to haven't necessarily had that piece, which is fine. But yeah, those were helpful. And then at those international meets, like just asking questions. Hampton's dad, Trip, has been like hugely beneficial. And is a guy where like I can always ask a question to, and he will always answer it. And I'm always asking him questions. Like every time I see him at an international meet, like, where is he? I'm going to go sit there. And if something comes to my mind, like I'm going to ask it. But outside of that, it's a lot of it's collaboration with other coaches. I think everybody always has value to add. If you spend any time around this sport, no matter how much it is, like somebody always knows something that you don't. So just asking questions and having conversations, and when somebody does something like, hey, why do you do it? I have no shame in like sending another coach a message on Instagram of something that I saw and saying like, hey, what's your thought process behind that? And then having that conversation. But realistically, like in a sense, everyone's like kind of coworkers, even though we compete against each other. And then from there, like early on, it was YouTube. I lifted under a bunch of different coaches. I knew kind of I was going to like get in more to the coaching world, so I just went and lifted for a bunch of different coaches to try to understand them. But yeah, now it's conversations with people and asking questions and trying to understand pieces that I think I don't understand very well yet. I wish there was like a source of knowledge in weightlifting that was all in one place on the internet. Someone needs to go do that. That would make everyone's lives a lot easier.
There are people trying to create these courses.
Yeah, yeah.
With like USA weightlifting, they have their two levels.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the two, right?
Yeah.
What do you see them trying to do to continue that, like continuing education or mentorship past those two levels?
Honestly, there's not much. I will say they did just put out like some additional courses that you can take. I think those are great. Because for a while, like your education was the level 1, level 2, and then everything else was athlete production based. But I think those new courses they put out are really helpful. But the high performance team is always there as a resource. Like Mike Atone and Sean Rigsby are two individuals where like I could reach out to them at any time and be like, hey, like, what do you think about XYZ? And having someone that's on the national team, we have monthly meetings with them. It's always an opportunity where we can chat and pick their brains. But I do certainly think it would be helpful, and I would be really into the idea of more continuing education in USA weightlifting, especially on the programming side and on the like long-term athletic development side. I think that's a piece that could be improved in certain areas in the sport. Not sure if they'll listen to the podcast. However,
We get like 3 views.
hey, you guys, maybe we do something with.
I'll just force Sean to listen to it.
Yeah.
You kind of mentioned that you have national team meetings monthly. You can message the high performance directors. Can anybody do that? Or is that specifically to that? And then how does that information get disseminated down the chain to those newer coaches?
These structured meetings are set for athletes and coaches who have athletes on the national team program. With that being said, both of those two are like great guys. And I would like to think that like anybody could approach them and ask them a question about weights at any time and they would answer it. I have no idea if there's a means to do that. But like they're both on Instagram. I'm sure they both have contact information on US Weightlifting's website. So I'm sure there is a way. But certainly like, we get easier access to the high performance team than most individuals do. But I think, like they're always helpful to anybody. I mean, Mike like just walks around a back room at a national meet all the time, just talking to people nonstop. So I think they'd be incredible resources for anybody. And I think they would help as much as they can in weightlifting for sure. The information that gets pushed down, a lot of that is just them helping us in a support way. So it's having those calls and they're there to help us with whatever they need, whatever that looks like. Sometimes it's issues that we're having. Sometimes it's talking about upcoming events and qualification and stuff like that. I do get the opportunity when I do get to learn things. So I was at the biomechanics camp, had those educational calls afterwards with the biomechanist, Christoph. And I was able to take a lot of that education that they gave us and disseminate that down to our team. So an opportunities like that present itself, like it's possible to keep doing that. And I wish there was more, that's for sure.
Yeah, I'm a course facilitator for like our level 1, level 2 essentially here in Canada. And I always ask for like feedback of like what went well because we get curriculum that we have to go into. And programming is always like the first one. So I ended up creating like a mentorship last year, and where I went through like I think it was 12 calls or 10 or 12 calls for like an hour with homework and all of that kind of stuff, trying to like build this competency. Because every time that I teach one of these courses, it's like I have 1 hour to go through programming, and it's like NCCP has these values and these pillars that they want to achieve, and like mentorship's a big one. But then when I look at the system that we're using, there's no continuing education past like these courses. It's like you take the course, you have to get evaluated, so you have to take an athlete through, and then that's it. And then there's nothing after that until you take your next level, and then it's the same kind of process. And there's no level of mentorship or like this mentorship needed. So what would you recommend new coaches kind of do to find that when you're not part of that high performance team or have those connections?
I think all of the coaches who do have that access like are great people who would be very receptive to somebody shooting them a message and asking a question. Um, like you messaged me in 2022 and asked me a question. Um, and I think that still now, like every now and again, I'll get a message and I'm always down for like, we can hop on the phone and just chat about whatever it may be. And I think all the coaches are. And I think finding somebody in the coaching world that can be that person for you that may be able to provide some value and chat with you. Maybe it's on a every couple months, you know. Um, but that would be my recommendation. Like, I think all of them would take 30 minutes once every other month to have a conversation and answer questions or just explore thoughts that people have. I think it should happen more in weightlifting. I think coaches should talk more and be more collaborative on things. And at the end of the day, like, yes, we're going to go to competitions and we're going to compete against each other. And yes, we may run competing businesses. It's not that serious. Like, there's plenty of people in weightlifting. There's plenty of people who are coming into the sport. Um, and knowledge is something that realistically shouldn't be gatekept at all. Um, so I think it should happen more. And so I would encourage people to like do that. Like send somebody and ask them a question. The worst thing they do is not answer, you know, and then
Yeah.
you're like, okay, that person is, they don't want to talk and that's fine. But 99.9% of people will answer that message and take the time out of their day without any hesitation.
I know as like an early coach, I was so hesitant. So like before 2022, I wouldn't send anybody messages because I was like, they don't want to talk to me. They don't care. Because in what I've found in Canada, it's a little bit more like rigid. Of secrets don't want to get let out, and it's like, oh, I have this programming secret. I'm like, no, you don't. You read the same Russian literature as everybody else, and you're pretending that it is transferable.
Yes. It's like, yes,
But
sure. There are things that we do that I think work really, really well, and I'm not maybe going to go sell the program on the internet, right? Like, yes, admittedly, yes, we have those things. With that being said, if a coach called me and asked me, and it was me telling them one of those things, like I'm telling them, you know, whatever that may be, like there's nothing that we do that is so earth shattering that it needs to be kept tight because it's some massive competitive advantage, you know? Um, and realistically, like most things come down to like implementation and like the actual coaching of it, not the, you know, data side of this, that, and the other thing.
yeah. Well, I like to view it like in this hierarchy where it's like the system is the most important thing. Where it's like, how does the system work
Mm-hmm.
by using principles?
Yeah.
So what are the principles? And then like we're talking about the little things that work really well. Those are just methods where it's like you can use that method. It's like Russian squat. People will be like, I'm going to run Russian squat, and they hit a 10 kilo PR, and they're like, I'm just going to repeat that because it worked really well. But then it doesn't have the effect, and they're like, well, that doesn't make sense. It worked, and it's like, well, that was a method used at a certain time with
Yes.
specific
Exactly.
characteristics, and then it's like maybe you're like, oh yeah, I use the flywheel, and that's my secret sauce, and I'm never going to tell anybody. But it's like somebody could use that and have the worst outcome,
Yeah.
and it gives them only negatives.
Yeah. And the reality of it is, like, they're like, yeah, I use a flywheel. That's my secret sauce. I don't want to tell somebody about it, but then they'll post about it on Instagram anyways. So, like,
You got to get clients.
yeah, exactly.
There's this one point in the podcast I was listening to is like, uh, oh, we do this, and it's like 20 different things. It's like, how do you have enough time to do that many things? Like, those are just like tools in the tool shed that you can like pick at. And one of the biggest things that have helped me, like talking to Max Ada a lot, was trying to write down my system and constantly reiterate and revamp what that system is. So it's like I know what decisions, because he was making the AI and Coach Logic, where it's like he had to sit down and think like, when this happens, why did I make that decision? Like A/B testing, or like, okay, I use these things to develop these. And when I started doing that, programming got so much easier. Everything got so much easier where it's like, okay, I'm going to do this because this makes sense in this moment. And then you slowly build up that awareness, which is kind of like that intuition, but you're just noting it down. And then you're able to implement methods better, where it's like, okay, Russian squat might work one time for some people, and then you kind of try and figure out why. And then you start testing and be like, okay, I'm going to test and test.
Yeah. The most important thing with like tight kept secrets is not the tight kept secret, but understanding why it works. And if you understand why it works, then you can recreate anything. So I'm all for sharing stuff and chatting. And, again, like I said earlier, I think everybody, it doesn't matter how long you've been doing this, like everybody has like at least a small piece of value that they can provide to somebody else. So I'm all for chatting and understanding what somebody does and learning and all that. I think it's great.
And so I don't want to take too much of your time. We're already at an hour and a half, my bad.
Fine.
So the question I want to end off with is, what is one thing that you think all coaches should start implementing?
That's a good question. One, I think the thing that I see way too often is athletes who I start working with who did not have a dialogue with a coach where they felt like what they're saying is being heard. It's sometimes it's just for various reasons. It's not always the coach's fault, but I think that setting up some sort of system that is weekly, monthly, bi-monthly, whatever it is, where the sole intention of that conversation is for the athlete to do the talking and tell you what their feedback is. We get in such a routine as coaches of giving feedback to them. I think it's getting in a routine of them giving feedback to you on how they're feeling, and then also like what's their perception of how you're doing for them. Asking them like, hey, is there anything that we can do better, that you feel like we need more or less of? But having that, like that monthly, and that exists in our check-ins, having that opportunity every single month to set a time for the athlete to do the large majority of the talking, and for you as the coach to get feedback on what their perception is, on how they're feeling, what their experience has been so far, and what you can do better for them. Because we don't do it perfect all the time, and we never will do it perfect all the time. And when it comes to a retention thing, it will be a massive game changer when an athlete feels like they can come to you and say, hey, I feel like I need more X, Y, and Z, or it would be really helpful if we could do this thing that would help benefit our relationship and what we're trying to accomplish. That's probably my biggest piece of advice. Give athletes a platform on a consistent basis to give you feedback.
That's fantastic. I like that one. So where can people find you?
You could find us on Instagram. My personal is at kfields_11. Don't have any reason for why the number 11 is there, but did it when I was 13. Most people use the
Gotta keep
class. I picked 11. And then at 1440 Strength on Instagram. And you can check out our website. It's 1440collective.com. Outside of that, if somebody catches me to meet, say hello. I'm always down to chat to anybody. And yeah, that's it.
Sweet. I mean, I my username on Instagram is Ginsha Ninja with 5 underscores, so
Yeah,
I can't judge.
Why 5 underscores? We'll never know, but there's 5.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, I tried one, and one was not taken, so I was like, I just go for it.
Yeah. Yep.
And now I'm like, I don't know if I can change it because.
Yep.
But thanks for tuning in to this episode of The Weight of Coaching. If you got something out of this podcast or this conversation, please share it with a coach or athlete who you think might benefit. All right. Thank you.
Thanks.